please understand if any of us seem awkward on camera. None of us are actors.
Yet.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm Dr. Richard O'Connor from Helena, Montana. I worked as a physician at St. Peter's Hospital for almost 30 years. And I'm here with Joan Bird, who came along with me today to help out with this interview. If you want to introduce yourself, Joan, and just let people know you're there.
Okay. I'm the author of Montana UFOs and Extraterrestrials, and I have a doctorate in zoology and background in science, and have been a UFO researcher since 1999, I guess, and travel around the state giving talks about UFOs and continue to collect information, and always enjoy hanging out with people that are interested in this subject and that have good stories to tell.
Great, thanks. So, Keith, could you tell us, what your history is as far as your work as a sheriff here in Montana?
Sure. I started in 1962 with what they call the sheriff's posse. We were horsemen, and I pretty much grew up as a horseman and knew animals pretty well. And I was just a special deputy then in 62, and in 64 I became employed by the Cascade County Sheriff's Office, and I stayed there until the early 90s. I don't know exactly what year. And during the 70s, there was some strange things going on in Montana, strange things going on in Great Falls, around Great Falls. I was pretty interested in what was happening. I asked the sheriff, who was John Kerschel at the time, if he would give me about 6 weeks. I could probably solve this. It was 40 years and 6 weeks ago, and I haven't solved anything yet. So,
okay.
I'm still working on it a little bit. There's some things that I still do. I have, during that period of time, there was UFOs. People were seeing UFOs all over the place, including myself. I didn't see anything as good as what I would like to have, just more than a ball in the sky flying around. There was Bigfoot, seen multiple times around this county, and cattle mutilations were going, and that's what I really centered on, was trying to figure out who was killing the cattle. And I don't know the answer to it yet.
Something we're all trying to figure out, and hopefully, through this interview, we'll get more information from you that will add to the data bank that people will become aware of. That the cattle mutilation phenomenon is still ongoing. It's real. It cannot be ascribed to natural predation, as some groups have described. So, Pete, can you tell us a little bit about your background with the Sheriff's Department in Teton County?
Sure. I was elected sheriff in 1974, November. Took office that same month and served until September of 1988, which at that time I had experienced heart surgery and opted to get out of the sheriff's office and went to the court system. Served as 26 years as JP, so I have 40 years of service with the county during that period of time. The first spring after I had been elected, as a matter of fact on Memorial Day of 1975, was the first reported cattle mutilation that we had in our county. And I think it was one of the very first ones in this whole geographic area. I happened to be out of town at the time it happened. Talked to the undersheriff and the deputies, and they had the wisdom at the instruction of the heifer owner to bring in our local veterinarian to examine the heifer, which he did. He did a necropsy in the field. I don't know that any tissue or fluid tests were taken. I don't think they were. But his comment to the guys were he had never seen anything like it in his life, meaning that after he opened the body cavity, the sexual organs had all been removed. A part of the facial plate had been removed. I'm not sure about the nose or the lips at this time, it's been so many years ago. But the entire situation was something that he had never experienced before, and at that time he was an experienced veterinarian. He was not right out of vet school. So it went on for another 2.5 years in our county till about probably 1976, 77, something like that. At the same time, we started experiencing UFO sightings. And people from various areas around our county. In the meantime, I also had made friends with Sheriff Kersel, neighboring sheriff, who was Keith's sheriff at the time, and through that friendship, I was introduced to Keith and the other deputies down here. So we had a team of people that we worked with during those years, good rapport, and like Keith says, unfortunately, 40 years later, here we are still wondering what had happened or what is happening. But I'm a firm believer that it is something that is not attributable to human beings. I don't know who is responsible, but it certainly isn't something that a human being is capable of. First of all, I don't think. Mm-hmm. And I have had similar comments from different veterinarians. I think if you ask Keith, maybe his memory is better than mine. Probably over the time that we were doing this, we utilized at least 5, if not 6 or 7 different veterinarians. Uh-huh. And the opinions pretty much were the same each time. Never seen anything like it. They just hadn't. Uh-huh. The tests that we were able to run were very limited in scope, very amateurish, if you will, meaning basically Keith and I kind of did what we wanted to do. We did call the vets in, had them look, give us an opinion. The other thing that occurred, this started, as I said, in Memorial Day. By midsummer that summer of 1975, it got very, very hot, July, August, September. So by the time some of these animals were discovered and reported to us and we got to them, the putrefaction of the bodies was so extreme that it was just really, really difficult to do any kind of an examination. But historically, most of the removal was the same. The face plate could be right or left side of the face, the ears, the mouth, the lips, the nose, and the vaginal area, and it was predominantly performed on the female sex rather than the male sex of the cattle. We had one horse that was involved, and it was, I'm going to call it a mini horse. It was a pony as opposed to a full-grown horse. That one was a male, and we also had a mutilation reported on a Hereford bull. Otherwise, they're pretty much all younger cows, mm-hmm. Calf-bearing ages and that kind of thing.
Okay.
And I didn't have in my county a Bigfoot sighting or report. All that happened down here with Keith in Cascade County. But we did simultaneously experience the UFO sightings, the cattle mutilations, those kind of things, and we worked together in trying to do what we could to do our thing in those days. Mm-hmm. And Keith was one of 4 deputies here in Cascade County that I cross-deputized. They were also they were authorized to use deputies' arrest authority in my county if necessary. So for the continuing time, they were part of our group, if you will.
Right. So all of you cooperated in investigating these mutilations, and you saw a number of these firsthand on the ground, I assume.
All on the ground.
Uh-huh.
Yes. The horse that he's talking about was one of the most interesting ones we'd ever done. I was there the day that we posted that animal out in the field, and the veterinarian did it. And it had 2 holes in the jugular. So we tried to figure out what would do that. We never came up with any answers, but there are a lot of speculation that maybe to keep the veins open, they would maybe put a saline solution in one, pump out the other, and the saline solution would keep the veins open. Mm-hmm. I think that was something the vet came up with. Mm-hmm. I certainly wouldn't have known that. And
This has been a common description with a lot of these mutilations, is these animals are found with their entire blood volume missing,
yes,
and no evidence of bleeding on the ground, and even in snow, I've heard.
I found them in snow. I've never seen any blood.
Never saw any blood.
No.
Okay.
And about that time, one in the snow, we found the serrated cuts. That was the first time I had seen the serrated cuts. First time I became aware of it because it was so prominent. It may have been in other cattle too, but like Pete said, when you go out in July or August and look at a cow that's been laying there for 2 or 3 days, you don't really want to spend a lot of time there.
Sure. Yeah.
And
I'm sure that's
so
true.
things change, I think, probably as far as that serrated cut might change
Right.
after a few days.
Right.
So we don't really know how many we had with that serrated cut, but it was very prominent when we first noticed it.
I have a picture in your book that you wrote, Mystery Stalks the Prairie.
Yes.
If you don't mind, I'd like to just show that here
Sure.
in the camera so people can see what you're talking about.
That was the one that I'm talking about. I'm pretty sure it's in the book.
Keith is holding in his hands there a book that he wrote called Mystery Stalks the Prairie. I believe that book was published in, what was it, Keith? 1976
I think so.
or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And in that book, he shows a detailed photograph of the serrated appearance of these hide incisions. And you can see there on the camera that it has this very regular serrated appearance to the cut edge of the hide incision. And then over here, Pete is holding a book written by Linda Moulton Howe called An Alien Harvest, also another excellent reference text for information about the cattle mutilation phenomenon. And in that picture, I think you can also get a very good idea of how the serrations along the cut edge appear. Very regular and very unusual, and they appear to be cauterized as the cut was made. Thank you guys for showing those. One thing that I would like to point out is that this cut edge is not characteristic of any surgical instrument currently in use that I'm aware of in any operating room in the country. You know, basically, to make skin incisions, they use a Bard Parker surgical steel blade, a harmonic scalpel, or a Bovie electrocautery unit. Those 3 items are used to make virtually every single skin incision in any surgical procedure in this country. And I have personally witnessed, thousands, probably 10,000 surgical incisions, and I've never seen an incision that looks like that. So this is being done with an instrument that is unknown to modern surgery. And I think that's important to point out. So thank you for bringing that up. So Pete, do you have any, a few minutes ago you mentioned that you thought that these mutilation events could not be due to human activity. They're obviously being done by some intelligence that has a tremendous capability to subdue a huge, powerful animal. And I've heard that this has happened with buffalo, elk, deer, pigs, goats, in various places around the world. And so if we're talking about an intelligence that's responsible for this, and it's not human, then this implies that our world is being affected, contacted in some way by some non-human intelligence. Do you agree with that?
I do, yeah. I guess my own personal observation is just these things are so neatly done, and you don't see it anywhere else. You being a medical doctor, if you say you haven't seen it, where does that take us? And if you look at those, and I've had them in hand, we would excise around the wounds and recover that portion of the tissue or the hide.
Mm-hmm.
Both Keith and I don't know how many of those we looked at and examined. Look at them, you know, with just a small glass or a microscope. But we're certainly not medical or scientific experts by any means. But it's just you don't see that kind of work anywhere else. And if you look at that closely, even in the picture, there are no hesitation marks, as you would expect to see maybe if it were snip, snip, snip with a pair of pinking shears, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't tell you how many days I spent in Great Falls here looking for pinking shears of that size, style, and kind. You can't even cut a cowhide with a pair of pinking shears. Won't work.
Yeah.
Just won't work. So what those instruments were that were used, don't have a clue, but it isn't something that we can say we can find another human being that has that ability.
Right.
We don't have that ability, to my knowledge.
Uh-huh.
So,
And you know, the other question it brings up is, how are these animals subdued? You know,
Yeah.
are they anesthetized? And if they are anesthetized, then that implies the use of a drug, right?
Yeah.
So one thing that I think has slowed down our understanding of what's going on with this is the American Veterinary Medical Association's unwillingness to address this topic like a professional organization should. One thing that should have been, you know, suggested long ago was to gain blood samples and tissue samples to check for the presence of any drugs that are commonly used either in veterinary anesthesia or in modern medicine. I've looked for those studies and have not found any that were adequate that really addressed how these animals are being subdued and subjected to these kinds of procedures. I think that's really an important question, and I think if the American Veterinary Medical Association was treating this subject with the seriousness that they should have been all along, that we would be much further down the line now in how we understand how this is being done, how these procedures are being carried out. So I would like to encourage veterinarians who may watch this to go to the American Veterinary Medical Association and ask them to give up this ridiculous position that they have that's based on a study that was done by the FBI in 1979, that this is all due to animal predation, when both you, Keith, and you, Pete, and anybody that's looked at this, maybe not had any personal experience, but looked at it from reports of Linda Moulton Howe and others who have looked at this, there's no way that this is animal predation. It's absurd to suggest that. And I hope that the American Veterinary Medical Association, the Montana State Veterinary Medical Association, and other veterinary associations around our country will soon begin to address this like the professional organizations that they should.
Well, and in that same vein, this is cowboy country where we live here in Montana.
Right.
There's, of the animals that I viewed that were down, there was no sign of any struggle. There was never ever any sign of someone on a horse, for instance, having roped the animal. They were just there. Just the carcass was there, no sign of struggle, no blood. On examination, body fluids are gone, the sexual parts and pieces are missing. It's unreal what was there given what wasn't there. There was no sign of any other thing. Keith mentioned he was born and raised with horses, so was I. I've worked on a lot of ranches. And if you're to go out here and put a rope on one of those cows, you're going to have some signs of struggle before that cow ever goes down through whatever means. Whether you shoot them with a rifle, whether you put them down medically or whatever, there's going to be some signs of struggle. There was no such thing ever.
I have
There definitely was never ever in any of the animals that I looked at any sign of any kind of struggle. They're just the carcass is there and the parts and pieces were made.
I do have a couple of documents that I got off of the FBI website. It's vault.fbi.gov. And in one of those documents, it says a bit regarding this conference that took place in Albuquerque after, I think they had 13 mutilations on a reservation there in New Mexico. And in this document it says, during this session of the conference, investigators from Arkansas pointed out that they have examined 28 cases of cattle mutilations, and it is their conclusion that all cases were the work of intentional mutilators and not of predators. So that's on the FBI's website. Then there was also on that same website a letter from Senator Floyd Haskell from the U.S. Senate. This was dated August of 1975, and this was addressed to Theodore Rosak of the Denver office of the FBI. And Senator Haskell wrote, "The ranchers and rural residents of Colorado are concerned and frightened by these incidents. The bizarre mutilations are frightening in themselves. In virtually all the cases, the left ear, left eye, rectum, and sex organ of each animal has been cut away and the blood drained from the carcass, but with no traces of blood left on the ground and no footprints." So that's just an excerpt from that letter, but I mean that's certainly consistent with the description that you fellows have given us about what you encountered here in Montana. This was down in Colorado, but essentially identical kinds of reports. These very stereotypical cuts along the faceplate, the upper maxillary lip, the mandible, the ear missing, sometimes an eye missing. And then these sort of cookie cutter cuts around the rectum and the vagina. So
we took those cuts down to Colorado to have a pathologist look at them, and he didn't know what they were. He had no idea.
Right.
So I didn't see anything like it. So another dead end.
Right.
And all the vets here had looked at it that we work with, and we did have some really good veterinarians working for us, with us. They would drop whatever they were doing, most of them, and just come out and meet us.
And the vets, excuse me, Keith, and the veterinarians that we utilized were large animal vets. They weren't doggy or cat vets.
That's right.
These guys made their living working with cattle and horses.
Right. And they had no clue about what they were looking at.
Had never seen it.
Do you think that when they saw these things, they had the same feeling that you did, that this could not have been done by humans, but they were just afraid to say it?
You see the one on the front of this book here?
Uh-huh.
There's a veterinarian standing right there with me. This is me, and this is Ken Anderson on the right. And the veterinarian that was working with me the closest was there. And what I'm looking at in here is the fact that the lungs are displaced and moved away from the sidewalls of the steer. I can't remember if it was a steer or a cow now. I think it was a cow. And there's no bruising, no hematoma, no nothing. So I asked the vet, why would this animal have the lungs tore away from its walls and not have, some bruising? He says the only way that could happen, if we got hit by a car, maybe, but he says that should cause bruising. He says, I suspect it's dropped. He says that would be my theory.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if either one of you follow Linda Moulton Howe's website very closely, but back in, it's recent, she was reporting on these mutilations that have happened in Kansas, and she showed a photograph of a full-grown cow with its mutilated cow with its head stuffed down in a post hole. Now, if that's natural predators that are able to stuff a full-grown cow's head down into a post hole, I'll eat my hat. So she, I'm sure that both of you have spoken with Linda Howe, and in my opinion, her website, earthfiles.com, is probably the best place to go for up-to-date information on the evolution of the cattle mutilation phenomenon and what's going on currently. So I just want to take this opportunity to encourage everyone who sees this video to consider taking a look at Linda Moulton Howe's website and even subscribing to her website, because that gives you access to many years of archives information that, if you really want to understand this or learn more about it, that's a great place to go.
I don't know if anybody has probably put in more time than her in this. I talked to her back in the 70s, and as recently as a couple of years ago, she wanted to put my book on the internet, and I told her to go ahead and do it, but I don't know if she did or not. I think she did. I just didn't want a big deal out of it. Just go ahead and do it. And
Right.
she wanted me to sign all these papers. I said, I'm not going to do that. If you want to put it on there, put it on there.
Of the different carcasses that we saw, and when I would leave ranch property, I would always tell the animal owner, watch the animal if you can, and let me know if you see anything come around. Well, in our area, we have, first of all, grizzly bear, have had for many years. We have lots of coyotes. We have hundreds of magpies, crows, that kind of thing. These animals were not subject to predation. They lay there and literally rotted away. Nothing ever ate them, nothing ever latched onto them and drug them, such as a grizzly bear. We have grizzly bear in town from time to time, the little town I live in.
Mm-hmm.
We have more bear now than we had 40 years ago, but the opportunity for predation was extreme. Never ever saw it. Keith took a lot of heat from the fellow that was the head of the Montana Stock Growers, is that the one?
Yeah.
About that very thing, that everything that had happened was all due to predators. Not the way it was. Absolutely not the way it was. Whether he ever went to one of these sites or not and looked at an animal, I don't have a clue. I would like to think maybe he did not, because he certainly was uninformed as far as I'm concerned. But that was his comment around the state. He made a lot of noise without ever having much knowledge. Never offered to come up and visit with Keith and I. Didn't say, well, next time you have a report, call me, we'll try and get there. He just had an opinion and an attitude, and that was kind of it.
Right.
Those two calves that we had up there that night, one in the water and something drug it out of the water. No tracks, and they had a little incision on it, and all of the innards were up on, sitting on top of the calf. How did he do that?
He had walked from grassland down to a lake to get it, and this is what am I trying to say? Not a reservoir, just a pothole. There's no water, it's just rain and what's what made it. But it's really muddy, so the cattle all use kind of the same path to get down to the water. These two heifers were together, and they got down to the water, you could see that. And then they were laid over, and it's like he reached out with a big hook and just literally slid them back, and no tracks of any kind. And they were back from the water probably 20 or 30 yards, something like that.
So a long ways.
Yeah.
And no tracks.
There wasn't even a bird track around them, much
Yeah.
less a human or a vehicle or anything like that. Absolutely nothing.
And we never saw any more like that.
And was there a skid?
Skid mark.
Skid
in
mark.
the mud.
Where you could see
Yeah,
that,
you
yeah,
could see
skid
the
mark
mud.
in the mud until they hit kind of dry ground. It wasn't dry, but it was drier than where it had left the track. Yeah,
Right.
it was just really weird and different.
Right.
And we did look at a couple of natural deaths. This summer we've had a lot of lightning. We've had cattle killed, horses killed from lightning strikes. It happens every year. So those kinds of things go on, from year to year. But for the most part, the ones that we're calling mutilations were something very, very unusual caused the death of those cattle and that horse that we saw.
Right.
I think probably the last one that I looked at was not too long before I retired, so that would have put it in the 80s. And Square Butte out here, you passed it when you came up here.
Right.
There was a rancher there, and he called me out to look at this cow. He says, I've got a cow out here, and it's kind of laying in a funny position and it's dead. So I knew this guy, and I went out there. And this cow is laying on its back, all four legs straight up in the air, and the bag is cut out. It's perfect circle. Gone. So I called a vet who lives out there. No, he did. The rancher called a vet, one that I've never used. And I called the vet and asked him if he would, when he goes out there, if he would call me and let me know. So yeah, he said, well. Several days go by and I never hear from him. So I call him up and I says, did you go look at that cow? He says, yeah. Find anything unusual? He says, no. Well, he says, there was one thing kind of unusual. I says, what's that? He says, well, it was pregnant. She was pregnant and the calf was gone. I says, you didn't find that unusual? So,
Yeah.
there you go. There's a difference between some veterinarians and other veterinarians.
Right. Right.
Didn't want to believe it.
Yeah. Keith, do you have a particular recollection about an interesting case that you would like to tell us about?
It's not a case, it just was a happening. I was returning probably 11:30 at night from Missoula, and I was in the area of Sims. And off the, to my left, there's a cliff which drops down into Sun River. And this orange ball came flying off that cliff, went right in front of our car, and gone. And I would say that this thing traveled a period of maybe 8 miles, 10 miles in like 4 seconds. I couldn't draw my line across the window, quick as that thing was going, and I had all kinds of equipment in the car, photographic equipment. I had Kenny Anderson with me; he was our photographer. We both saw it, but that very same day, this gentleman had a guy up on Freezeout Lake see a UFO kind of attach itself to a bomb run. What kind of planes were those?
B-1s, B-52s.
Yeah. And this guy took his rifle and his scope and put it right up there on top so he could get a good look at this craft. And I think the rest of the story is yours. You made some phone calls.
It's a long story. I'll do it. Do you want to do that now, or do you want to get?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So
Yeah.
a detachment from Louisiana was assigned to Montana to set up a portable electronic bombing range. This is the Air Force. And I don't remember the exact year. I'm going to say 76, 7, or 8 in there somewhere. The little town that it was near is north of where I live. It's near the north boundary of Teton County. So they set the unit up, and I guess there were 20, 25, maybe 30 people, Air Force personnel assigned to it. And the bombers would come to the area from out of state, North Dakota or wherever. Predominantly there were B-52s and B-1s. And they would contact the station and get whatever information they shared with them. They would make the bombing run west toward the mountain front, and then their exit was to make a turn right on the mountain front and come east again. Usually the outbound track would take them over a place that we call locally as Freezeout Lake, the Fish and Game corner there. So this gentleman Keith was referring to, it was a Fish, Wildlife and Parks employee. He was going home for the evening. It was about 5 o'clock. So he left the parking lot from Fish, Wildlife and Parks property, stopped for traffic coming on the highway, and while he was stopped, something caught his attention in the peripheral vision on his left-hand side, and he looked up, and here is the bomber, his B-1, B-52, whatever, flying, and usually they would be outbound at around 500 or 600 foot. This was a low-level run, all the work they did. and right above it at the tail and slightly behind it was a saucer-style UFO, and it followed that aircraft out of sight for the fellow that was observing all this. So he came to town, drove up in front of the sheriff's office, and it was 5 o'clock, a little after by then. I'm ready to go home too. So he just sat in his pickup for a few minutes and kind of collected himself, and pretty quick here he came in, and he was just almost white. Couldn't talk, he just was out of himself. So we sat him down, got him a cup of coffee, and got him going, and he related the story to us of what he had just seen. Just scared the pants out of him.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the one and only occasion that we had with those bombers that were flying in and out.
Uh-huh.
But pretty significant situation to this fellow that viewed that. And I think it was Keith. Didn't you pull that off the Freedom of Information Act later? Some of the particulars on that?
I think I didn't, but somebody did that I worked with from back east. I can't remember his name, one Greenwood maybe. He had sent me some stuff on that, and all the radar went out. I think it was in Mountain Home.
The radar equipment on the aircraft
Oh.
going outbound was disabled during the time. And of course we made a record of it, date, time, location, all that. And from that, I guess that matched up with the time that was recorded by the aircraft.
I see.
What had happened to them, but it apparently disabled most of the electronics on that aircraft for a period of whatever time, I don't know. But pretty unique.
Yeah.
And he called it a UFO. He said flying saucer. And when he described it, he gave the physical description of the saucer that we all know from the media, that kind of thing.
Right.
That's what he was referring to, is the saucer style as opposed to the mothership or the cigar-shaped thing.
Okay. That event.
So before all this other stuff had happened, I had met the officer in charge. I want to say he was a colonel, doesn't make any difference. We had visited, they used to host quarterly meetings for the sheriffs here in Great Falls at Malmstrom Air Force Base.
Uh-huh.
And I always tried to come down and have lunch and meet the guys and talk to them, as most of the other sheriffs in the area did. So I met this gentleman and we visited, and he said, well, we understand you guys are trying to find these UFOs and track them and do all these things in the evening hours. He said, if it happens again, why don't you give us a call? And if we're not doing something else and our equipment's available, we'll try and zero in and see if we can find these on our equipment up there. Okay. So the evening that this incident happened, a friend of mine, a retired school teacher, drove into my office about 9 o'clock at night, and it was in the fall of the year sometime. It was dark by then. He walked in and he said, have you looked outside your window here? I said, no. So I looked off to the south and west, and here's this bright light up in the sky, and he said, that's too big for a star, and it's too close, and whatever. So I said, well, why don't you get in my car, make sure you have your seatbelt on, because we're going to go do a visit. So we beat feet at 100 miles an hour plus down the highway, which is the drive to the location we're going to, probably 12, 15 miles. As we traveled, or as the crow flies, to the approximate location where this bright light was at. And on my way out the door, I asked the dispatcher to call the Pendroy tracking station and tell the officer in charge there that we were onto something, and could he see if he could track it. So down the road we go, and we turn off the highway, and we're flying down the road on a gravel road. And in our area, in that location, there is an improved gravel road almost every mile until you get to a point, and then the roads become fewer and fewer, so it's hard to make your way through that area. So this light, for us, the two of us in the car, it stayed about the same intensity and size. Then all of a sudden it looked like, well, it's moving away from us. And about that time we get a phone call from the office, and they said, well, the colonel or whatever called and said they have locked on to an object. They don't know what it is, but it is in the area you're talking about. He said, well, we can still see the light and we think we're maybe 5 miles from it, something like that. So as we drove, all of a sudden the light goes out. So I called the office and I said, well, we no longer have a light. They said, well, the tracking station said they can still see it and it's moving in a northeast direction and not at high speed. And they gave me the speed. I don't remember what it was. Like 15, 20, 30 miles an hour, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it went on for a few minutes. And then on the radio, the law enforcement radio, I forget whether all four of you guys were in the same car or two and two.
Yeah, Glenn Osborne and I were in the car. We should have been right under it.
Okay. So Keith, we all have the same radio system.
Mm-hmm.
Keith and his sheriff at the time, and were Kenny and Arnie.
I don't know if they were out or not. I can't remember.
I can't remember either. So they get on the radio and they said, Howard, where are you at? We're getting in on this. Okay, fine. So I told them. As it turned out, we met on the highway, and the colonel had called and he said, you need to come up here. He said, I got something on the scope, you need to see it. So if you can come on up. So I called these guys, told them we went to Pendroy, went in this trailer, and normally the equipment in there would be staffed by one person. Well, the colonel was so excited about what he had seen, he had 2 sets of eyes on every machine. He called out extra people to visualize what they're watching.
Uh-huh.
So we walk up to, and there's a scroll there similar to a polygraph. I don't know if you've ever seen one or not. In the medical field, you probably are heart monitor machine, something like that.
Yeah.
But there's a scroll, and that scroll was telling them the distance from the radar site to where it was over the ground, told them the altitude above the ground, it told them the speed, what else? Can't remember, if anything else. But he said, here's the unique part of it. In the meantime, then, we're looking at the scroll, and it's coming across at a fairly steady, just a little bit of a waver in it, and then all of a sudden, it goes straight up, instantaneous stop, and then it starts floating again. I said, my goodness, what do you suppose that is? The colonel looked me right in the eye and he says, you know, we do not have a clue. I had been in the Air Force for however many years. He said, we don't have anything that can fly like that.
Mm-hmm.
And they gained like 6 or 8 or 10,000 feet of altitude, just almost instantaneously stopped and then started just drifting again.
Wow. Hmm.
Pretty unique. And then it wasn't long after that, and here come a couple of cars of security guys, and they came in and ushered us out, took the scroll with them, and that was the end of playtime.
As I recall, they said that they would have somebody from the Pentagon call you or something the next day.
Yeah,
You're
so
still
the next day I sat there and I waited and I waited and I waited, and no call.
Oh. Uh-huh.
So I thought, well, no sense getting in a hurry. This is the government we're dealing with. So,
What did the guys look like that came in? Were they wearing uniforms?
well, yes, but it wasn't an Air Force uniform. It was like black coveralls, I must say. They had a uniform of their own. There was 3 or 4 of them, and they had metal tubes so long, and they rolled the scrolls up and into the tubes they went, and out the door they came in their car with blackened windows, and down the road they went. So it was pretty unique. And then the next day, I finally called the base commander in Great Falls, and I said, we were going to get a phone call, and nobody's called. Well, yeah, we're just doing a little debriefing amongst ourselves. But somebody will be calling you. Okay, so I sat there again that day, did other things waiting for the phone call. Long and short of the story is never did get a debriefing call from anybody.
Keith, on page 55 of your book, Mystery Stalks the Prairie, you wrote that Deputy Arnie Sands interviewed a sergeant who was stationed at an ICBM missile site near Vaughn, Montana, and was told by that sergeant that a UFO hovered over the controlled airspace of that nuclear missile site, taking the form of a large and a very brilliant light through which he could not determine a shape, but was also not accompanied by the sound of a helicopter. That report is consistent with, and you may be familiar with Captain Robert Salas,
Yes.
who has also told us about incidents where UFOs have hovered over nuclear missile sites and actually turned off our nuclear missiles.
Exactly.
On numerous occasions, apparently. This April of 2016, Mr. Robert Hastings, a UFO researcher, produced a documentary film called UFOs and Nukes, The Secret Link Revealed, in which he interviews, I think it's 4 or 5 different previous United States Air Force officers who were also stationed at various nuclear missile installations and who have also testified that they were present when these UFO events occurred and our nuclear missiles were rendered inoperable, basically.
It was in '67 that Robert Salas was involved, and that's what he talks about. I got involved in one in '76, and in the Lewistown area, a giant craft hovered right over the top of the missile silo, but it's the headquarters. What do they call it? The launch control facilities.
Uh-huh.
And everybody was down deep, except the guys up there. Was a few guys up on watching guard. This craft came down, and they notified everybody down below what was going on. They all went upstairs and looked at this craft. It was right there. They notified Malmstrom. Malmstrom called the Air National Guard. 2 jets were sent down there immediately. This was like October, November. And as it approached that missile site, the craft just went straight up in the air and jets went through it. Jets came back around and apparently didn't see anything. After they had come back, the craft came down on top of the missile silo. And this was kept kind of secret. One of the officers, I shouldn't say he was an officer, he would not identify himself, but he was on the site that night, came into my office, and he wanted to talk to me, and he wouldn't divulge his name or his rank. He just said, I want you to know I was there, and it happened. He says, what happened? He described everything I just told you to me in detail. And apparently there's some numbers on the computer that controls where these missiles are going to go. And all those numbers were changed.
Wow.
I thought that was interesting. I would like to have known what they were changed to.
Uh-huh.
But I never did find out, or what they were to begin with.
Uh-huh.
I hadn't heard that one before. That's very
It's
interesting.
pretty classified, I would say, that were, if they're numbered to go to a certain spot and they were all changed, what does it mean?
Yes,
Right.
I'd like to know what they changed them to.
And then when it left, they reset everything. But it really happened, and it was huge. It covered the whole launch control facility. Lights just lit up. The period of time that we were working on this, I got very involved with Malmstrom Air Force Base.
Uh-huh.
And found them to be more than helpful. They supplied me with night vision goggles. They would answer any questions we had for them. They had one night we had a flap going on with sightings going on all over, and they even had one of our deputies go out to their, I guess it was their radar unit, and watch what was going on. So they invited us out to see that, and for whatever people might think that the military might know what's going on, but if they do, as my friend told me, that's much higher than he is.
Uh-huh.
And he was the commander at one time of this base out here, so
Wow.
he doesn't know.
Well, that's good to know, that it's not everybody in the military that's been responsible for covering this up. But I think, I don't know, from what I've learned about it, I've come to the conclusion that there's definitely been some subset of the, quote, government, unquote, that has been involved in trying to dissuade people from looking at this. At least that's my conclusion.
I just, for the reason of Malmstrom being in Great Falls, I just want people to know they were cooperative.
Yeah, good to know.
I don't know about the rest of the military. I'm sure there are some cover-ups that they don't want us to know about.
Mm-hmm.
But there's been a lot of books written about military people seeing a lot of strange craft.
Sure.
And they all come in different sizes and shapes, as I was talking about before. The most interesting one that I can think of, it was fairly recent, say within the last 10 years. A rancher lives straight south of here. His wife gets off work at midnight. She picked up her mother and drove to the ranch. And as they're driving out, this is the Eden country out here. If you look straight south, it's all Eden. And they live, and then there's a big turn in the road, and then it's a right-hand turn down a gravel road, and another right-hand turn into their ranch. Something came down on top of her car, hovered right above it, and she's driving, you know, probably 55 to 70 miles an hour, she wasn't sure. And the sides of the road were lit up, and the grass was moving. She made that first right-hand turn, and the craft went right with her. It never varied one bit. It stayed right on top of her and made the same right-hand turn. The next right-hand turn she made into the ranch, it made a left-hand turn. And this lasted for several miles.
Wow.
Didn't hear any sound, whirring sound. She thought it was a helicopter, because what else could it be? But this ranch has had a history of other strange things going on. You talked about the cow with the head in a hole, post hole.
Mm-hmm.
This guy had a steer, and its horn was stuck so far in the ground, the deputy that went and looked at it had to have help pulling it out.
It's kind of hard to imagine how that would happen unless the animal had been dropped
Exactly. That's
from a height.
something we could think of. Same way with your cow with the head in the post hole. How do
Yeah.
you get that? You can't jam it in there. You
Yeah.
can't take a steer and jam his head down into and put the horns in the hole, you know. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it was dropped. And the more I think about over the years, I'm sure most of these cattle were dropped. However, sometimes you find them under a tree. How do they get there?
Mm-hmm.
This one with the serrated cut was covered almost with snow on the trees, which didn't fall off, and had pretty good protection underneath that tree from being dropped.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it was dropped. That one, I think something else happened to it.
I got a call on early one, or where's the same day or the next day? Doesn't make any difference, I guess. A family had been in Great Falls shopping, man, wife, and 2 or 3 kids. They got home, it was dark, and there was a cigar-shaped, I'm going to call it a mothership, if you will, stationed over the driveway into their home. The house was located probably a quarter of a mile off the secondary highway that takes you to the house. So they stopped short of going even onto their own driveway, and then finally they went on to the house, got out. The ship simply moved to the west a little bit, gave it some space. They got out of the car, went in the house, and the gentleman had a pair of binoculars. I remember they purchased them that day or they're laying, but they're immediately accessible. So he looked at it for a while out the window, as he and his wife and the kids did. Finally said, well, I'm going to go out and see if I can get close to it, get a good look at it. So he left the kitchen area, went outside, and as he tried to get closer to it, it started moving and would just simply evade, if you will. It backed up, but not high speed, about the same speed he was walking. So he finally just made up his mind, I'm just going to keep at it and see if I can't wear it out and get to it. So if you go south from his house, it's about a quarter mile to the highway, and from the highway south to the Sun River is a distance of maybe a half a mile, and then it drops down into the river bottom. So he followed that ship that distance. In the meantime, there was a colony, if you will, I don't remember how many in number, 3, 4, 5, maybe more, of smaller disc-sized ships that were coming and going out of the underneath of this mothership, or the cigar-sized thing. And it finally got over the river valley and just simply disappeared over the edge of the hill, and that was the last he saw of it. But both he and his wife and the kids all had really good look at it. It's pretty interesting talking to him. I think Arnie did I think we did a polygraph on that one even.
I don't remember. I just remember you and I talking to him, and he just was very honest.
Yeah. I guess that's the other thing that maybe is important for the tape. The people that we've talked to, or that I talked to anyhow, whether it's mutilation, UFOs, whatever, they're just good common people. They're not kooks. They didn't make outlandish statements. They weren't looking for any press. Never any mention of money for the stories, any of that kind of thing. Just, hey, this is what I saw. Will you come and listen? Let me tell you about it. They're just good, solid, sound people. I never listened. I probably did and didn't know the difference, but I'm going to say I didn't listen to any of the kooks, if there were any out there. And I talked to a lot of people over the years, both with the UFOs and the mutilations, and they're just good, solid people.
That's important to point out. You know?
Yeah, you know, they're not people looking for notoriety or anything like that.
Yeah, you often hear people say, well, the only people that see those things are kooky people.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's true at all.
And in those days, we didn't have we didn't have cell phones and all that kind of thing. So for the most part, during the daylight hours, some people were packing cameras, but a lot of other times and different hours of the day, there were no cameras.
Right.
So you have so much more media, if you will, available today than we had back then. So there's a lot of things they were telling us. They didn't have any way of substantiating them through pictures,
Right.
because a lot of it was nighttime occurrences. The other one, and this is a real classic, this is my favorite of all of them I did. We got a report about 6:30, 7 o'clock in the evening. It's a fall night, I do remember that. About a 60-mile-an-hour wind. It was dirty, dusty, cold, and one of our county commissioners lived out east of Dutton. So he gets over there, and the county commissioners had their own little roads or radio system that was connected to the road department system. We couldn't talk directly to them. We could talk to them through my office, but I couldn't talk car to car. So the commissioner gets out east of Dutton, and he has a sighting, and he's pretty excited, so he tells them what he sees, and I go out and get in the car, and I head out for Dutton. In the meantime, and this is a distance of 20, 25 miles, something like that. So when I get over there, he said, it left, it's just gone. He said, I'm on my way home. So he gets home, and I thought, well, I'll go out and visit with him and see what he did see. So I get to the house, and he and his wife are there, nobody else. And the kitchen table is just covered with paperwork, and she's just frantic. And she's going through looking at things, and the commissioner's standing there, and he's kind of laughing and giggling. And I said, well, what's so funny here? What did you see? Did you tell your wife? Well, yeah. He said, she's looking to see if my life insurance policies cover me being taken by you. And that's what she was doing.
She was serious.
She was serious. She was looking towards insurance policy.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyhow, and then a sighting he saw was, he called it a disc. And it was probably like a minute. He didn't have it in view that long. It was later, I think that same night, when my old buddy John Kersel called and told me that he just rented a helicopter. He was going to run it down with a helicopter and know the reason why. Well, luckily, it was blowing so hard, the private helicopter services wouldn't fly.
Oh, that's probably a good thing.
John would have done that. He's going to charge it to me, too.
Okay.
And the last one, south of Shoto, about 2 miles, 3 miles, something like that, there's Twin Buttes, Priest Butte, Rattlesnake Butte. Family lived in their home between the buttes, and this lady gets up in the morning, makes coffee. She's standing in the kitchen window looking out over the sink toward Rattlesnake Butte, which is the one farthest west, and it's a distance of a half a mile, maybe a little bit more. and it's daylight, but just breaking day. Well, here's the mothership just hovering, if you will, in a kind of a little natural depression up on the side hill. And the saucer type ships are flying in and around and over the top and going around the hill and back again, going in and out of the belly of the mothership. Well, then she wakes her husband up and he gets up, and they watch this together for like a half an hour. Finally, in their visitation between themselves, they decide to call me, but she doesn't. She said, "Are you busy? Can you come out?" She didn't say what she was looking for or looking at, and I wasn't bright enough to ask her. I just said, "Yeah, I'll be right there." So I got dressed and went out, and unfortunately, I drove right by where this had been.
Oh.
Yeah, and it turns out it left before I got there.
Uh-huh.
But I didn't know why I was going or what I might have been looking for
Yeah.
or looking at. But she gave the two of them, they gave a pretty explicit description of what they saw. And they called it a cigar-shaped mothership because of the entry and exits of the little guys into the bottom of it. And she said it went out of sight by going west around the hill, and then just because of the hill, it was gone.
Was she fairly close to it?
Half a mile or about that distance from her
Yeah,
house.
pretty close.
Yeah, and the little basin or draw that it was hovering in, all it had to do was just barely come out of there and around a corner and it was out of sight. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Every time I go down that road, I think of it and I look at it and boy, I wish you'd come back. That'd be quite a view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was the Pearson case.
Yes. Yeah. And that one, they never had a reoccurrence. And farm people, just good, solid people, and
Mm-hmm.
see, first thing in the morning, that's what you woke up to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people, when they look at stuff, especially on the internet, they're very suspicious about whether, you know, what they're hearing is the truth. It's something that's becoming more and more difficult, and I've noticed myself, you know, it's becoming more and more difficult when we look at stuff on the internet to know, you know, are we listening to the truth? So, you know, having listened to the two of you present this material, I have no doubt, you know, that you're telling us in a very truthful way about these experiences that you had. I'm assuming that that's a fact, correct?
I
Yeah.
certainly don't think anybody ever lied to me about it.
Okay.
I had no reason
I
to.
never felt that anybody was, you know, not setting me up, but there just because they wanted some notoriety or something out of it. It's something they saw, and I do pretty good interviews. If I'm looking at you for some reason, I've got a reason to talk, and I can do interviews. So I think I have the ability to pull that out of somebody if they're not being truthful.
Right.
I never ever felt that way with the people I talked to. Just good people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One other question, just to alleviate any skeptics' minds. I called the two of you and asked you to participate in this, and you just readily agreed to do so. You have no financial incentive for doing this. You have no other reason to do this other than you both have had some unique experiences in your careers as sheriffs, getting calls, fielding calls that most of 99.9% of us wouldn't get. And so I just want to make it clear that, you know, nobody's being paid for this. Nobody's going to realize any financial gain from participating in this interview. We're just doing this so that people can know about some of these experiences and understand that there are events going on in the sky and events going on in the ground that have been going on for decades now. And people need to be aware of it, and they need to pay attention to it. Because I think that as more and more people begin to incorporate this into their worldview, that we'll begin making faster progress towards figuring all this out and eventually leading to some better understanding of what all this is that's happening and why it's happening. Okay.
Okay, if we were talking about people perpetrating a hoax, I have one, I just don't believe it happens. I think everything that I saw and talked to was a thing. But it brings me to mind one night, Sheriff Osborne and myself received a call that there was something going on out towards Sims. And we should be out there. There was a lady out there who was babysitting, and there was something hovering over her house. So Glenn and I got there pretty fast. I think we both probably got out of bed. I did this many, many times. Get out of bed, get dressed, and go. And when I got out there, I found, I think it was 3 children and the babysitter hiding in the fireplace.
Wow.
It was a huge, huge rock fireplace. And genuinely afraid, scared. They watched this craft. This is a hotel size. This is huge. This is, well, they had given me a size. I don't recall right now what it was, but it could have been like 300 feet long. It was tremendously big. Had a row of windows across the top, a row of windows across the bottom. And it just floated. It went over the house and then floated right along the ground. And she said it went over and up that road that goes through the big ranch out there. Oh, it used to be, what does it say, Newman? Hamilton Ranch. Yeah. So Glenn and I left them. We waited until I think the parents came home and sat with them. Then we took a drive up that road, and we spent a lot of time just listening and looking. Probably traveled maybe 20 miles around. Never saw anything. However, Glenn seems to think something happened that night. I even talked to him today about it. I said, what? Well, he says something was wrong. I says, what way? He says, I don't know. He says, time-wise, things didn't add up for me. So I don't know what that meant to him. Usually when I left somewhere, I would keep track of my time. So I didn't lose any time, because a lot of people lose time, apparently. My car never, ever quit running, which seems to be a story that people will tell you, my car just quit.
I've heard that before.
So I never had that problem, but I thought that story was interesting. You know, why would anybody perpetrate a hoax like that, and then you get out there and find them hiding in a, you know,
in a fireplace. Yeah.
And very sincere. The kids were all scared. And of course, she was scared, which made the kids scared. But that was not too long after Pete's story about it. And it's not very far away from. He goes up right across Sun River, and up on top of the plateau where Pearson lived.
It's just
Earl
across the
Brown,
river.
or whatever his name is.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, the ranch, the Hamilton Ranch, lays down in the river valley.
right.
This is right up on top of the ridge above it.
And there's a road that goes through the ranch. We took that. And I think it's on that road that Glenn is confused.
Lowry Road.
Yeah,
Supposed.
exactly, Lowry Road. And I didn't feel that I had that problem, but he was with me a lot. Glenn was.
I guess the important thing for me in relating what I have told you is for people to know and understand that I myself saw one instance, and that was the bright light that we chased that they did catch with the radar thing, and whatever it was, I don't know. We never saw a shape. We didn't see any kind, just the light. And the light went out, and that was it. All of the other incidents are things that other people experienced and told me. Like I say, I have just a lot of faith in their integrity, their veracity. No reason to believe that they were lying to me. None at all.
Right.
And as far as your comment on, are we being paid? We signed up for let's make a deal, but I don't know what happened. Yeah, no, certainly. And my idea, the whole thing is just when Keith and I were working, that's why we took pictures, that's why we wrote reports. It's for posterity. It's, hey, you know, you make a record of what you do. You're public servants, first of all.
Right.
We're individuals too, and we are now for sure, but you record these things, you make it, and as far as I'm concerned, everything that I left behind in my office is public record. I did it on county time. I was paid for it with county money. Anybody that wants to see that, if the sheriff will allow them, can go and see it. It's not anything at all that's secure or has some kind of a security attachment to it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
would some of those things be photographs that you took of some of the cattle mutilations?
yes, there's photographs and reports.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a few and different notes, different letters. Different people would write a little letter and send it in. So I may have to call instead of calling me or seeing me on the road and talking to me. They'd send me a letter and say, "Hey, did you know?" And then I contact them and go that route.
Uh-huh.
So there's just different things that we collected and put into preservation, if you will.
Right.
Yeah.
Good.